The Colosseum stretched beyond sight, a monstrous construct of alien ingenuity. Towering spires of obsidian metal and energy conduits pulsed with an eerie glow, feeding the vast structure's thirst for spectacle. The sky overhead shimmered with force barriers, caging the pit below, where countless warriors had bled for the entertainment of the roaring crowd. Tonight, the masses were restless, their voices an overwhelming cacophony of languages, some guttural, others melodic, all converging in eager anticipation. They had come for carnage. In the heart of the preparation chamber, surrounded by creatures bred for war, the human stood apart. He was lean compared to the towering brutes clad in organic carapaces, steel plating, and energy shields. His skin was unmarked by the deep scars of countless battles, his face unreadable as he adjusted the wrappings around his fists. He neither snarled nor postured, showing none of the bravado that made these fights as much a spectacle outside the arena as within it. The laughter started as a low murmur before swelling into a full-throated roar. Warriors of all species turned toward him, their teeth flashing in mockery. A reptilian brute, scales dark as coal, stepped forward, flexing claws the length of daggers. This is the best they could find. The creature's voice rasped, thick with disdain. A soft-skinned thing that wouldn't last a minute against the lowest among us. Another, hulking and armored with thick bone plating, let out a guttural chuckle. Perhaps it is a pet, a novelty, sent to amuse before the real battle begins. The human remained still, eyes cold, surveying the room like an outsider studying beasts in a cage. If their words affected him, he gave no sign. A sharp metallic click echoed through the chamber as the overseer entered. A wiry figure draped in ceremonial robes, its four-glimmering eyes swept over the fighters. "Enough," it commanded, voice modulated by a translator drone hovering at its shoulder. "The wagers are placed. The battle begins." The warriors turned away, their interest in the human fading into cruel certainty. He would not last. The Colosseum's history was rich with the blood of species that had fallen under their fists, but humans were rarely among them. Those who had entered the arena had been broken within moments. Beyond the chamber, the crowd's hunger for violence intensified. Holograms flickered to life above the arena, displaying odds and statistics. The alien champion's name burned bright in glyphs of gold, Korthal the Unbroken. Below it, the challenger's name appeared in stark contrast, barely acknowledged. The betting halls erupted with activity as credits flowed like water, all against the human. A single wager, large enough to stir whispers, broke the pattern. The figure who placed it remained concealed in a darkened spectator box, their presence notable only by the brief flicker of their silhouette against the glow of the betting interface. Their lips curled into the faintest of smiles. The gates groaned open. A wall of light flooded the passageway as the fighters stepped forward. Korthal entered first, and the ground trembled beneath his sheer mass. For arms thick with coiled muscle flexed as he raised his war axe high, basking in the adoration of the crowd. His exoskeletal armor gleamed, reinforced plates shifting seamlessly with his movements. His face, more beast than man, twisted into a grin as he turned to face his opponent. The human followed, stepping onto the blood-stained sand without hesitation. The shift in atmosphere was palpable. Expectation, once light-hearted and amused, coiled into something sharper, tinged with an unspoken curiosity. The contrast was striking. No heavy armor encased his form, no visible weapons hung at his side. He wore only a fitted combat suit, lightweight and flexible, designed for movement rather than brute defense. Silence wavered for the briefest of moments. Then, as if on cue, the laughter returned. Korthal took a step forward, rolling his shoulders, relishing the inevitable slaughter. "They mock you, human," he rumbled, his voice thick with amusement. "And they are right to do so." The human met his gaze, unreadable, unshaken. The overseer raised a single, spindly arm. The countdown initiated, glyphs flickering in the air above them. The final seconds stretched, tension thickening. The signal blared. Korthal lunged. Korthal moved like a living avalanche, a mass of muscle and armor crashing forward with terrifying speed. The war axe, easily the size of the human's torso, whistled through the air in a downward arc meant to cleave him in two. The crowd roared, already tasting the inevitable kill. The human was gone before the axe struck. He shifted at the last possible moment, a breath's width away from the descending blade. Sand exploded where the weapon landed, the impact sending a tremor through the arena floor. Korthal snarled, twisting with unnatural speed for something his size, his second pair of arms already sweeping to intercept. But the human had already moved, slipping past the enormous reach of his opponent. The audience, mid-cheer, hesitated. Korthal turned, eyes narrowing. He had expected blood, the dull finality of a body split open before him. Instead, the human stood just beyond his reach, balanced, poised. Not retreating, calculating. With a growl, the alien champion surged forward, swinging in a broad, relentless series of strikes. The war axe became a blur of motion, each blow designed to corner, to overwhelm. There was no space to escape, no pause for breath. Yet, the human did not fight back. He did not block, did not meet strength with strength. He flowed. The strikes came in endless succession, each promising a brutal end. But the human was never there to meet them. His movements were impossibly efficient, precise. A subtle shift of weight, a slight pivot, just enough to let the attacks skim past. Close enough for Korthal to feel his opponent's presence, but never close enough to land true. It was maddening. The crowd, once howling in amusement, fell into murmurs. The laughter had stopped. Korthal snarled, slamming a fist into the ground, sending up a spray of dirt to obscure his next strike. He pivoted, using his lower set of arms to feint, the upper pair driving the axe forward in a deadly thrust. The human stepped inside the attack. It was the first time he had moved toward the champion, not away. The shift was so unexpected that Korthal hesitated for a fraction of a second. It was enough. A brutal, precise strike, just beneath the alien's lowest rib plating. The impact sent a tremor through Korthal's body, sharp and sudden. His eyes widened, the breath forced from his lungs as something inside him cracked. The human withdrew just as quickly, retreating out of range before retaliation could come. Korthal stumbled, one foot sliding in the dirt. A murmur rippled through the stands. The wound was not deep, not fatal, but it was real. The human had drawn first blood. For the first time, Korthal hesitated. He knew battle, knew the language of warriors, and the way a fight unfolded. This was not the flailing of an outmatched opponent desperate to survive. The human had measured him, studied him, and, in that brief moment, landed a strike with surgical precision. This was not luck. The realization sent a slow wave of unease through the champion. The crowd, sensing the shift, began to murmur. Warriors in the barracks, who had mocked the human, now leaned forward, eyes narrowed. Korthal bared his teeth, shaking off the discomfort. He would not be humiliated. With a roar, he charged again, abandoning precision for sheer power. The ground shook with each step, his axe carving through the air like a scythe. He abandoned defense, seeking only to end it in one crushing blow. The human watched, expression unreadable. He was waiting. Korthal swung. The human ducked beneath the strike, pivoting as the axe tore past. The champion adjusted mid-motion, expecting the human to retreat, but he didn't. Instead, he stepped forward. A sharp twist, an upward strike, fingers curled like steel, straight into the nerve cluster beneath the alien's jaw. Korthal's vision blurred. His balance faltered. The pain was sudden, electric, and for a brief, horrifying moment, his body refused to respond. The human stepped back, untouched. Korthal staggered, catching himself, rage burning through the haze of pain. He turned with a snarl, but the confidence in his stance was gone. The human exhaled slowly, shaking his wrists loose. He did not speak, did not taunt. He didn't need to. The message had already been sent. He was no victim, and Korthal was not fighting prey. He was fighting something far worse. The air in the arena thickened, the weight of realization pressing down on the spectators like an unseen force. The human was still standing, untouched. More than that, He was controlling the fight. The chance of Korthal's name had dulled, replaced by something more uncertain. Warriors who had once laughed now watched in silence, their eyes tracing every shift in the combatant's movements. Korthal exhaled sharply, resetting his stance. His arrogance had cost him. This was no mindless brawl, no battle of strength alone. The human fought like a predator, patient, watching, waiting for weakness. There was no wasted motion, no desperate scramble. Every movement was deliberate, honed with intent. But strength was still strength. And Korthal had spent his life proving that nothing could stand against it. His muscles tensed, his forearms flexing as he adjusted his grip on the war axe. No more careless swings, no more blind rage. He would end this properly. The human didn't move. He stood poised, weight balanced, his expression unreadable. Korthal attacked. This time, there was no reckless charge, no overcommitment. He shifted, faster than his bulk should allow, angling his strikes to cut off every escape. The axe became an extension of his will, sweeping through the space between them with ruthless efficiency. The human dodged, but barely. The strikes came closer now, forcing him to adjust, to work harder. A fraction of a second slower, and he would be caught. Korthal pressed forward, forcing him back, step by step. The arena walls loomed closer, behind the human, limiting his options. The crowd stirred, sensing the shift. He had been impressive. Yes, but it would end the same way it always did. Strength would win. It always won. Then, the human did something unexpected. He stopped retreating. Korthal swung. An overhead strike meant to split his opponent in half. The human sidestepped at the last second, pivoting close. Too close. Korthal felt it before he understood it, the sudden shift in weight, the loss of balance. The human had hooked his arm over Korthal's elbow, using his own momentum against him. A sharp twist, a calculated drop in weight. Korthal stumbled forward, forced off balance for the first time. The audience gasped. The human moved instantly, a blur of motion. He struck, not for power, but precision. A rapid succession of blows, aimed at the nerve clusters along Korthal's ribs, his throat, the vulnerable joint where his upper and lower arms met. Each strike sent a ripple of pain through the champion's body, dulling his limbs, slowing his response. Korthal roared, swinging wildly, but the human had already disengaged. The champion's arms felt heavier, his movements slower. He forced himself to focus, to push through the pain, but the truth clawed at the edges of his mind. He was losing. The human exhaled, rolling his shoulders. No gloating, no taunts, only that same quiet calculation. As if he were testing something, measuring each reaction. Korthal knew that look. He had seen it before, long ago, in the eyes of seasoned hunters. The human was not here to survive. He was here to dismantle him. A cold sensation spread through Korthal's chest, something deeper than pain. For the first time in his life, the thought took root. He might not win. The crowd, sensing his hesitation, began to shift. The roars of confidence had softened, replaced by murmurs of disbelief. The betting halls erupted with frantic adjustments. Korthal bared his teeth, gripping his axe tighter. It didn't matter. He was still stronger, still faster. One mistake was all he needed. The human watched him, expression unreadable. Then, slowly, deliberately, he lifted a single hand and curled his fingers inward. A challenge. Korthal charged. Korthal's charge was not reckless this time. It was measured, a calculated explosion of force and speed, closing the gap before the human could maneuver. His war axe came down in a brutal arc, not as a single strike, but as part of a relentless assault, each movement flowing into the next. He aimed not just to kill, but to overwhelm, to leave no space for escape. The human didn't run. He met the attack head-on, pivoting at the last possible second. The axe narrowly missed, its momentum carrying it past him. But before Korthal could recover, the human was inside his reach. A sharp strike, a fist to the exposed joint beneath his uppermost ribs. Pain flared through Korthal's body, immediate and sharp, but he gritted his teeth, twisting to counter. His lower arms lashed out, claws aiming for flesh. The human ducked, sliding under the strike with unnatural precision. He was too close now, dangerously close. His hands moved in a blur, targeting tendons, joints, the weak points in Korthal's otherwise impenetrable frame. Each hit was small on its own, but together they were devastating. Korthal stumbled. The shock of it was worse than the pain. His body, the body that had endured 100 battles, that had crushed warriors twice his size, was failing him. His movements were sluggish, his limbs refusing to respond as they should. The realization sank in like cold iron. The human had done this. He hadn't been fighting for survival. He had been dismantling him, piece by piece, from the very beginning. Every strike, every dodge, it had all been calculated, planned. This had never been a contest of strength. It had been a lesson. Korthal snarled, forcing his body to move. He swung wildly, abandoning strategy, abandoning everything except the sheer will to crush the thing in front of him. But the human was already moving, already slipping past his reach, already driving another precise strike into the base of his skull. Korthal's vision blurred. The arena was silent now. The laughter, the jeering, it had all vanished. The crowd watched transfixed, as the impossible unfolded before them. Korthal fell to one knee. His breath was ragged, his limbs numb. He tried to rise, but the weight of his own body defied him. He had never felt this before. Weakness. The human stepped back, expression unreadable. He did not press the attack, did not gloat. He simply waited. Korthal stared at him, his chest rising and falling in heavy, labored breaths. He could see it now, what he had refused to see before. The human had never been prey. He had been the predator all along. The realization settled over him like a final blow. The arena erupted. The silence shattered into a chaos of voices, disbelief, fury, awe. The betting halls were in turmoil, credits shifting in ways no one had anticipated. Warriors who had once mocked the human now studied him with new eyes, their expressions unreadable. The overseer raised a hand, the official signal to end the match. The battle was over. The human had won. He turned without a word, walking toward the exit, his posture relaxed, unshaken. He had no need for cheers or recognition. He had already proven everything he needed to.